looking at a sculpture from before the 19th century, such as this one, we usually think about the subject of the sculpture itself, and not about the material that was used for it. So, looking at this beautiful statue of David made by Michelangelo, we think why he portrayed David, what that means, and we don't ask ourselves the question of why he chose marble. He chose marble because the sculpture had to be glorifying, and it had to stand outside in the rain and resist the atmospheric conditions. But the material wasn't part of the artistic decision. And that is true for all the sculptures made before the modern art revolution that started when the world stopped portraying the world in a figurative way. And the question of materials became part of the artistic decision. But that doesn't mean that the materials were free from the cultural accretions. So for example, wood. Wood was used by people from the prehistoric times because it was very easy to work with, it was soft, it was very easy to find, but it was also not resistant to the atmospheric conditions. So we don't have many old sculptures made out of wood that made it till our times, until they stood in a church. Then we have clay, so ceramics. But with ceramics, with clay, we usually have little sculptures because you have to have a very big furnace to actually burn the sculpture and make it weather resistant. Then we have metals, mainly bronze, that is now known to be one of the primary materials of the ancient Greeks. But this process of making a bronze sculpture was a lot harder than making a wooden one or a clay one, because first you had to have a clay model and then you had to cast it in bronze. And then we have stone, mainly marble. We think about ancient Rome, but also throughout the early modern period, it was believed that ancient Greeks also used marble, because it was believed that the Roman copies that were made from the Greek originals were actually the Greek originals throughout the Renaissance and the Baroque era. So you see that you have all these cultural, historical accretions built up on these materials. And to ask ourselves a question on how that affected women and how the plastics revolutionized kind of how women made sculptures, we have to firstly ask ourselves, did women even make sculptures before, and how this looked. So sculpture was a very male-dominated art form, not like painting or drawing. Because, for example, painting or drawing was a good hobby for a young aristocratic girl. It was culturally appropriate for her to draw, to paint, and we have painters that grew from being an aristocratic girl who was taught to paint, for example, Sophonisba and Gusiola. The other way that women could learn to paint was if their father owned a workshop and was himself a painter and taught their daughter how to paint. That is the example of Artemisia Gentileschi. We don't have the same examples in sculpture though, because it was not culturally appropriate for women to work around these big blocks of stone. It was also very strenuous, you have to have a lot of strength, and I don't want to say that women don't have the strength to work with stones or with metals, because of course they do. But the thing is that it wasn't culturally appropriate for them to have that strength. Also, you have big skirts, you would have to be in a workshop with a lot of men, so you couldn't change it to pants or something else, because you had to stay very decent around other men. So we don't have many examples of great sculptresses that made it before the 19th century, where women were allowed to go to the academies and actually learn sculpture at the academies of fine art. So what happened at the beginning of the 20th century? The plastic happened. So we have all these new materials, and the way that we make the sculpture changed a lot. Because if you have plastic, you can make sculpture in a very different way than with marble, for example. You don't have to subtract the material, because, if you have a block of marble with this sculpture behind me, and if you chisel away the material, if you put the chisel in a wrong place, David could lose a leg, and then you have to buy the whole block of marble again. With plastic, you don't have that problem. You can melt it again, usually. You can also build the sculpture just by adding different elements to itself, so it's a lot easier. but it's also very different. Also, plastic was very transparent. It could be transparent, it could be very moldable, very good for bodily sculptures that talked about the body. It was very culturally feminine in the sense that marble and stone is very culturally male, as you can see this division. So it was very culturally okay for women to actually use the plastics. It was thought of as kind of a womanly material. These conditions built this situation in which a lot of women at the beginning of the 20th century actually reached to plastics and made their name by making their sculptures in plastics. And I want to read you out a list of names, so you can take a picture, look at them later on. It's Louise Bourgeois, Claire Falkenstein, Eva Hesse, Judith Bartolani, Martin Cannell, Berlinda de Brauchere, Sarah Holt, Louis Nevelson, and Nikita Senfal. Okay, and now looking at our own Polish playground, who do we have? We have the person of Alina Szabocznikov, a Polish sculptress that was born in 1926 and died in the 70s, who of course started as a socialist realism artist, as many artists at that time in Poland did. She worked with bronze and with metals, with clay at the beginning of her journey, but then she moved into plastics and she started using plastic materials in her work, and she's best known for that now. Her whole work focuses on female body. She used to cast her own body, but also the body of women around her, and build her sculptures from these casts. Also, she talked about a lot about her experience with breast cancer that she unfortunately died from. And as you can see behind me, you can see one of her works, one of the lamps that she made, and you can see the casting of lips of probably one of her friends, molded together with an everyday object. It creates kind of this fetishized object, talks about female objectification perhaps. You can of course interpret that artwork in a lot of different ways. She uses the plastic materials, kind of pushing it to the limits, as I said. You can see the castings of the breasts here, so you have this part, but you also can see that she molded into the sculpture pictures. So you can use plastic in that way as well, that you can mix all different materials and then create still a very coherent sculpture at the end. Okay, so we could say, yeah, she made sculptures in plastic and she became famous, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the material itself was part of the process here. So I want to show you what happened when she reached to marble one time. And this is not a piece of work that was made at the beginning of her career. This is at the time where she already worked with plastics. So the newspaper article reads, Alina sculpted her bellies in the marble of Michelangelo. And you can see how taking the material from the same quarry as Michelangelo did in the Renaissance era, puts her against him, puts her in this competition. And the thing is that if you have a great master, probably the most well-known sculptor of all time, and he puts anything from modern art next to it, it doesn't mean if it's a woman, if it's a man, it will always fall a little short, because it's compared to Michelangelo. So this comparison is not good. Of course, it's great for her because she is even put there next to Michelangelo, but she will not be better than him in any way. So that's why choosing this material is kind of problematic in a way that she will never get out of this comparison to male counterparts. And then she makes a series of different sculptures based on the same cast as the first one that I showed you. So it's the same belly of the same friend, but this one is made with plastics. These are cushions that she made to go to other people's houses. It was like a play on the belly being a soft material, the plastic also being kind of soft. And you can see that this comparison with Michelangelo, with the change of material, disappears. We don't have it anymore. So this plastic kind of enabled women to create this space for themselves in the sculpture art, where they weren't compared to their male counterparts throughout history, actually. And that's why we have so many very good artists, a lot of also great artworks from the beginning of the 20th century made by women created in plastic.